Today, we get a chance to share communion at the end of this time before we leave together. And if you've looked at the title of the message, I talk about an oaken table. It's not because underneath this it matters whether this table is made out of oak or not. That's not really the point. The point is that we've been talking about oaks of righteousness, and that this table, representative of Jesus' last meal with his disciples, and an ongoing celebration that we get to have of remembrance of Jesus, of God, the bread to feed us, of Jesus, God, the Holy Spirit of God, in the picture of the bubbliness of wine being able to provide the intoxication of energy and life, that those things represent something of feeding us for the task of living this different kind of kingdom life. And so what's been happening over the last several weeks, God's been providing us the opportunity as he's spread seed over the soil of us to see if those plantings can go in and then reach down and begin to grow something that becomes roots, that works its way up in us and through us to become oaks of righteousness, plantings of God. And through the spreading of that seed, the question is, what is it that we're feeling, seeing, experiencing? Where does it come in? If today's your first day, there'll still be, by the time we get there'll still be the opportunity for the things that we have learned to make some difference in what God may float to the surface of as we share communion, union, connection with God and one another over this, of what it would be. But for those of us who have been here for 1, 2, 3, or 4 of the last 5 weeks, what has God already planted in the stories that we've been talking about? So I want to look quickly at a few things, then ask the question to set the stage for how we might reflect and not just listen, but live out in our very practice of the celebration of communion, taking the next step in whatever God's doing in us to heal us, to grow us, to strengthen us, to help us become those kinds of oaks that are a display of his splendor. In Luke chapter 4, we see Jesus at the very beginning of his ministry. He's had the temptation in the wilderness. He's been baptized. He's on the scene, and he started to do some healing and some teaching, and he arrives at Nazareth. And he goes into the synagogue on the Sabbath day in this place there where he grew up and where people know him from before but don't know him like this. And he decides to step up and take his turn, and they hand him a scroll. And it says here in verse 18 that he found, verse 17, he found the scroll, he found the place where it's written. Verse 18, it says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, and to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." He's quoting what we now know of as Isaiah 61, verses 1 and part of verse 2. But he's stating what we can then watch he's going to do for the rest of his life. A ministry of healing and giving and teaching to help those who aren't having enough. That's that idea of poor, that the poor is actually every single one of us. It's just, how are you poor? How are you lacking enough? It may be with your physical needs. It may be emotional, spiritual. For all of us, it's usually related to, no matter what others are true, our own overwhelming sense of fear and lack of a sense of love. Poor in really believing that our identity is the delight of God, that we are his children who he cares for. And so he reads of this, and we're going to see that in the rest of the story, as you've been listening, the rest of the story, they start to be really pleased that he says these words and the things that he's already done, and they can't wait for him to do these kind of works in their own life. But let's look at Isaiah 61 quickly. In Isaiah 61, where this is quoted from, the last thing that we read was that he said, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And in verse 2, it continues in Isaiah 61. It says, and the day of the vengeance of our God, and to comfort all who mourn, and to provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and the garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. And so if we see this overall, we see two things. One, and we're going to talk more about it in the days ahead. We won't focus on it today, but he leaves out this part about vengeance. There doesn't seem to be anything about what Jesus is going to do that has anything to do with any kind of vengeance. It has to do with binding up broken hearts. It has to do with freeing captives. It has to do with darkness or blindness becoming sight, oppression becoming freedom. It has to do with this delight of God. It has to do with, for those of us who are going through it right now, and this week is unbelievably tough, grief. The grief of losing people, the grief of losing ideas of what might happen, the grief of losing some of our health. We come to this Thanksgiving week, and for some of us, that's what's so hard, is who's not going to be sitting at the table, or who we thought we'd be by now, or what we thought would occur by now, or what we thought would never happen to us by now, and yes, it's there. And here he is saying, like, no, even in the midst of your grief, there can be beauty amongst those ashes. There can be something worth holding on to in the midst of that despair. But all of this that he is doing, this spirit upon Jesus and then coming through Jesus and what he teaches and what he does, how he relates, how he connects, all of this, look at the end of the next part of verse 3, these people, they will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. Verse 4, they will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations. And we could go on to read more of how, with the exception of that one part of verse 2, all of Isaiah 61 is of this same vein, of God binding back up what's broken, of God restoring what's been lost, of God renewing what's dying. And that's what Jesus is saying, and that's what he's doing, and that's what he's offering, and that as he does it to you and me, that we become not just those who are grateful for the gifts or for the healing, but we become the very oaks of righteousness ourselves, that we then participate in being the display of his splendor, so that through you and me, broken hearts get bound up. They don't get more broken. Through you and me, people see more clearly, not more darkly. Through you and me, people are less captive to their own things and not captive to us. Through you and me, people who are mourning don't feel alone. Know that they can be with us through it no matter how long it takes and no matter what has been lost, that there's something left on the other side that's worth also holding on to. Through you and me. And it comes to this connecting point in just a second, because Jesus is going to celebrate this meal for the last time that sets the stage for it, as he's about to sacrifice his very being. Not pull the power card, not stop bad things from happening, to himself, for the sake of it being the full strengthening and planting of what would happen. And so we look at this, and I wonder, as you come today, thinking about those words and receiving those words, which ones resonate with you? Which ones are where you find yourself? And then I add to it this. When we go back to Luke 4, we're not going to read any of the verses there, but just look, when we go back to Luke 4, we know that Jesus, knowing that these people in Nazareth are hoping to get it all taken care of for them, they're really looking out for themselves and can't wait, right? That he challenges them with a couple of stories. And in the last couple of weeks, we had a story of a woman from Zarephath, a prophet named Elijah who's trying to do the God work, and it's threatening his own life. A woman in Zarephath who's at the very end of her resources, and her son, she thinks this is going to be their last meal and they're going to die. And yet somehow God supernaturally working between the two of them provides enough. And then she's the one who's struggling. Maybe this is where you and I are, that learning what it means to every single day have just enough, just in time. Just enough, just in time. Every day for there to be a handful of flour and a little bit of oil to make just enough for today, but there's always then emptiness before the next day it's refilled. And yet I can count on you, God, that it's going to show up. And I don't need to store any away because it doesn't even work. And I don't need to worry that it's not going to happen. Just trust my daily bread. But in the midst of that, she's also somebody, and maybe this is where you are, she's also caught up in the idea that it's unsafe for God to get too close. And although she's grateful that God's in her life and providing in this unique need, when something goes wrong, she's sure it's because God's gotten close and God's seeing how bad she is and God's punishing her because she has a wrong view of God as punisher, not provider. Not the one who brings life, but the one who takes it because we're not perfect. And so she has to overcome seeing that to see, oh no, now I see what this God is really like. A guy named Naaman, who seems to be a really great guy and who people love, who are near him, but he has this disease that provides this separation between him and others. Something gets in the way of him being able to be all he wants to be. And when he finds out that there is a chance that he could be healed, he gets caught up, as maybe you and I do, not wanting the simple. It seems too silly and too stupid and too simple that I would go splash in these waters 7 times. These waters aren't even clean. I've got better waters. I got a better idea. Isn't God going to do some big magical thing through his prophet? And instead, he has those who love him say, just try the thing. And for some of us, we just need to go to one more meeting. We just need to try one more time. We just need to not give up on the routine that keeps us sane or sober or healthy each single day. And we give up on it because we're not sure it worked, or we tried it, or we got serious about it for a time, or this just seems silly and stupid, and yet our healing is at the end of sticking with it. Maybe that's where you and I are. There's also then this guy, Gehazi, who comes into the scene. He's a servant of the prophet. He's a God person. He can represent for all of us good churchgoers who are still unbelievably fearful and therefore selfish as buzzards who can't wait to take care of ourselves even if it costs other people. Because we're so worried that it's not going to take, even twisting God's, I'm sure that God brought this rich guy into our land so that, you know what, even if Elisha doesn't want to take any of that stuff, he's just messing up. God surely did it because we all know we need stuff. And what would it be for the decisions we make as the people of God, looking out for ourselves while at the same time it harms others? All of those people are welcome at this table. But we have such a hard time processing some of that the Nazarene people in Jesus' synagogue that day, they don't like being challenged that this isn't the way I've thought about God. This isn't the way I've thought about people. This isn't the way I've thought about how rewards and punishments work. This isn't the way I want to hear it, Jesus. And so they don't know what to do with being challenged, and they're angry inside, and they're aggressive to the point that at the very end of Luke chapter 4, verse 28 says, all the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard Jesus tell these 2 stories. They got up, drove him out of the town, and took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built in order to throw him off the cliff. But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. It's this picture of another group that we could be too. The confused, the angry, the not knowing what to do with our energy, the just wanting to make the mouthpiece or the event or whatever it is go away. All of us are welcome at this table. And then I want to add to it Luke 22. In Luke 22, we see the story Luke tells of that Last Supper. Let me give just a couple of verses from it. In 7 and 8, it says, then came the day of unleavened bread on which the Passover lamb had been sacrificed. Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover. Skip ahead to verse 14. Then the hour came. Jesus and his apostles reclined at the table, and he said to them, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. Skip down to verse 21. But the hand of him who was going to betray me is with mine on the table. Before we read more verses, Jesus is going to plan for them to come together in a celebratory meal. It has purpose and meaning in it as being the Passover, but Jesus is about to give a brand new meaning. But even as these guys come, and even as Jesus is interested in him, you know who else is at welcome at the table? The betrayer. The person like Gehazi, the person like the Nazarenes, the person like Judas, who even as they come to the table, even as this food, this drink of God himself could encourage you otherwise to seek forgiveness, to seek change, you might not. And you know what? You're welcome too. Because what Jesus does at this table is wash all of their feet. And part of that is because Jesus is setting the stage of a different kind of table. Look at verse 21. It says, "But the hand of him who is going to betray me is with mine on the table." And then skip down to 23. "They began questioning among themselves which of them might be who would do this." And then verse 24, strangely, it says, "A dispute also arose among them as to which of them was considered to be the greatest." The way this story is told is they're sitting around their table, which they would have been, on the floor, and they're celebrating this Passover meal. Jesus is going to give it brand new meaning, and there's not only one there who may represent some of us who can't wait to get his agenda done, even at the expense of Jesus, who might have had good motives in his head to push Jesus to go ahead and get started, because he was sure at some point Jesus is going to bow up and bring some military and take over the Roman oppression, and that just wasn't Jesus' agenda ever. But Judas is going to force that, but he's not the only one, because they all sat around there and wondering, what have I done wrong? Could I be the one capable of betrayal? And yet they're all sitting at the table. But as betrayers, possible betrayers sitting at the table, do you know what they're else doing while they're sitting at the table? They're wondering, am I better than you? Are you better than me? Which seat matters most? It's that deep fear, that deep shame in each of us that needs us to compare and compete and compare and compete, compare and compete, and even to turn God's table into this, that there are only those who are holy enough to come, so I shouldn't come. That's not Jesus' teaching. That's maybe some church teaching, but that is not Jesus' teaching, that you can't come because you're not good enough, because the first table had a table full of betrayers who are wondering who's greatest, not getting it after 3 full years alone with Jesus. And so any obstacle to you coming or to anybody else coming, you're missing it. The whole point is, all are welcome, even if you're going to kill me right after this. Even if you don't understand the teaching that you've learned it yet. Not because it's okay to not learn, not because it's okay to be a horrible person, because I'm coming to offer you this meal in gracious love, not anything that you've deserved or earned. For the sake of planting it deep in you, that you would heal from your brokenness, that you would let go of the things that captivate you, that you would stop being the Gehazis of the world, that you would stop letting your anger and feeling uncomfortable rule everything, and you miss God as he walks right by and you try to push him off a ledge. That this table is part of the essential, not because if you don't taste it or touch it, you're not going to be okay with God, because of what it represents, and that God is offering us in every single day, in every single meal. The chance to be any of these people and know what we need more than anything is deeper connection, that he is in me and with me and strengthening me and nourishing me and saturating me with his spirit and giving me of his bread of life, because it's the only way for me to go from whoever I am to a step towards more like an oak of righteousness. The typical table for the typical gathering is based on providing you with some kind of benefit and you providing me with some kind of loyalty. That's what's so interesting about Jesus holding it at this time, is that Herod was having a very similar meeting, having people to his place. And as with Herod or anyone else in the world, if you'll be completely loyal to me, I'll reward you. I'll give you stuff. I'll give you responsibility. You stick with me. You come to by coming to my and sitting at the right place on the table, we can all judge who's closest to me and who matters most and who has the most money and who has the most significance and who's the most attractive to those things, and we'll decide as it sits there. And then in exchange, you'll walk away and you'll do whatever I want you to do, even if it's not in your best interest. And Jesus is doing the complete opposite. Jesus goes, I don't care where you sit at the table. I don't even sit at the table. I climb under the table and take your stinky feet and wash them, because that's what this is actually about. All of you, including the one who's going to kill me, you're welcome. And I'm going to wash all of you, because this is about not only an open invitation, but it's because I'm already loyal to you even when you're not loyal to me. Because the reward is connection to me, not because it's going to be some kind of benefit after the fact. This isn't using God as a transaction to get what you want, whether that's forgiveness or success. It's believing that intimately acquainted that I was made yours. I am your child. You delight in me. I am well-pleasing to you, even when I'm not well-pleasing. Because that's who you are, God. So in just a second, when we get a chance to share these things. We have all those in mind, and then one more. Brandy gave us already a good overview. I won't spend much time on it. But in 1 Corinthians 11, even after Jesus dies and rises from the dead, even after Jesus is gone but here and a new church starts, even after years of doing church as it's begun in the early church, Paul is writing to the Corinthians and saying, how could you come to this table and not realize that you're taking care of you and messing them over? That you're filling yourself so full, you're full of food and drunkenness, and they have nothing. We have really, I struggle with how bad we have done a job in many church settings over the course of our lives, making people wonder if they confessed every single sin or whether they could come or they had that one thing in their heart. Like the whole point of you creating divisions, the whole thing of you evaluating yourself before you come and not taking this in an unwise manner is not whether or not you're perfect. It's whether or not you give a rip about other people. It's not about whether you get yours. It's about whether you make everyone else know that they are graciously welcome here and that everybody here gets the same thing they need, which is everything they need, which is all of God in the representation of the bread and the cup. The point isn't how good you are. The point is, do you understand that you can't come to this and think that you're better than anybody else, that Christians are better than anybody else, that there's anything better than anybody else, that the behavior's better than anybody else, that churchgoers are better than anybody else and deserve some kind of seat at the table that's a little bit better and God likes you more. There's just none of that in Jesus' teaching. Instead, it's the exact opposite. And yet, it happened in the early church. It happened with his disciples. It happened in the Old Testament. It happens to us. And so in just a second as we come, I can get the opportunity to pass out. Today we're going to do this a little different. Today I'm going to have the deacons pass out juice and bread and ask you to receive it and hold on to it until we can all eat it together. Not because it's the best way, because it's the way today that we want to prove, show, remind ourselves of all of us eating the same thing, all of us eating at the same time, because all of us, regardless of whether we're coming as super faithful or super unfaithful, as super questioning or super trusting, all of us eat it together because every single one of us are made in the image and likeness of God, loved deeply and needing of his continual reminder of this is the only way we live his kingdom life. So if I could get the deacons to come. If y'all just stand there for a second. So today we're going to have trays that are going to be passed to you. When you receive the tray, you're going to need to be able to take with one tray, you'll need to take a little cup of juice. What you'll probably also need to do, and you can see it in front of you if you've never noticed it before, there are these little rings in front of you. You may need to set that in that ring when the bread comes by so you can take one piece of bread. It's already ripped up. You don't have to worry about being able to tear, but so nobody has to worry about juggling and spilling and thought, okay? But you also can help one another in the midst of this. And so it will get passed so that everyone gets a cup, everyone gets the bread, and you hold on to it until we get to that point when we're all going to do it together. When this is happening, and you're helping one another and you're getting it, we're going to have music playing. And so I want you, though, to not miss this other side, which is use this time for reflection. Which one am I? Which ones am I? Am I like Gehazi? Am I like Naaman? Am I like the widow? Am I like Elijah? Am I brokenhearted? Am I grieving? Am I like those Nazarenes? Am I like those Corinthians? How do I come today, and whatever it is, honestly acknowledge where I both need forgiveness and encouragement and help, knowing that it's all here available, that none of it rules me out? All right? So let me say a word of prayer, then I'm going to ask them to pass it out. Music will start. And then once we all have it together, we'll eat together, okay? God, as we distribute these things now and as we reflect, help us. Help us to be thoughtful and reflective and meet you in this space, feel connected to you in this space whether it's easy or difficult, whether it's comforting or challenging. Help us as we help one another with these elements so that that doesn't get in the way, that it just becomes a moment where we all get to be with you. In Jesus' name, amen.